My name is Martin Lugmeier, and I'm working for the Energy Department of the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. It's a pleasure to moderate this edition of the digital series of the Global Manufacturing and Industrialization Summit. So today we are discussing mainly how small island development countries and their economies, particularly their manufacturing and servicing sectors, can benefit from the information and communication technologies, and particularly the wider field of digitalization. Let me say some few words about the Global Manufacturing and Industrialization Summit. So the GMIS is a joint initiative of UNIDO and the United Arab Emirates. It was established in 2015, basically as a platform to facilitate dialogue between industry, government, and academia on how the manufacturing sector in developing countries, including small island developing states, can benefit from the trends and the solutions of the fourth industrial revolution. So now due to the COVID-19 pandemic, as we all know, as we are sitting in our rooms in different parts of the world, this summit was held in September in a virtual format. And due to the success, it was decided to follow up this virtual summit with a digital series, and today we have one of this edition, and this will be made available also on the website of the GMIS initiative. So once again, I would like to welcome the speakers, the distinguished speakers to this session today. As we all know, digitalization and Industry 4.0 is really changing, transforming our personal lives, but also the economies we are living with and we're working in. And now we can imagine, due to the small size and remoteness of small island developing states, they are distant to international markets. They have a particular interest to harness the benefits of digital infrastructure for the green and blue economy aspirations. So digitalization is not just a tool, it's really its means to be able to participate in these new global value chains. Aside from traditional sectors like fishery, agriculture, tourism, and so on, but also to tap into new emerging economic sectors. So this is on the one hand. On the other hand, it's also meaning to become more resilient against external shocks like climate change impacts. We're having today two representatives from the Caribbean, and we would have also one from the Pacific, and they know how it feels when you hide from climate change impacts, let's to say, and what it means to the economy. So also the COVID-19 lockdown and the supply interruption have demonstrated how important ICTs are, these communication technologies. So I think we can summarize that the post-COVID island economy needs to be green, blue, and digital. So before I would like to introduce the panelists, I just would give the word to my colleague, Ralf Bredl, who is the chief of the Division of Asia and Pacific in UNIDO, and he's also spearheading the SITS strategy of UNIDO. Thank you, Ralf. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Martin. So distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. So thank you very much for being with us here today, and thank you, Martin, for the kind introduction. Allow me to provide a little bit of background for our discussion today by highlighting UNIDO's strategic framework for SITS. UNIDO is the specialized agency of the UN system mandated by our member states to promote inclusive and sustainable industrial development. And as such, the organization has a comparative advantage in addressing industry-related vulnerabilities of SITS, especially in the wake of the fourth industrial revolution. 34 of our 107 member states are classified as SITS. So this is an important 20% of our constituency. And of course, due to their different geographic, environmental, and economic realities, each SITS faces very specific challenges and development opportunities. However, some of the challenges of SIDS are common, such as their small size, limited natural resources, typically a narrow economic base, large distance to economic markets, and vulnerability to climate-related disasters. So for quite some time, UNIDO has been providing responses to these challenges through a quite sizable portfolio of technical cooperation interventions, which yet we have implemented on a standalone basis. So these included interventions in the fields of waste management, development and use of renewable energy, export promotion through economic diversification, and compliance to international standards, building resilience to environmental shocks, agribusiness and fisheries, and institution building combined with industrial policy development. But in 2019, taking into consideration UNIDO's commitment to the Samoa Pathway and other key frameworks, our member states approved a dedicated SIDS strategy for the years 2019 to 2025. So the strategy is a key instrument that helps to streamline and strengthen UNIDO's interventions in SIDS in line with the outcomes of the midterm review of the Samoa Pathway. It also aligns the interventions of UNIDO with our own 4 thematic priorities, namely creating shared prosperity, advancing economic competitiveness, safeguarding the environment, and strengthening knowledge and institutions. And precisely to create knowledge products that can be used to raise awareness on the development challenges of SIDS, we launched a series of capacity building webinars titled ISID for SIDS, where ISID stands for Inclusive and Sustainable Industrial Development. So we started in November with a webinar on blue economy, as Martin already pointed out, while today's discussions would tackle the important issue of ICT, and are co-hosted in the framework of the GMIS webinars series as well. Subsequent webinars in the ISID for SIDS series throughout 2021 will address complementary SIDS challenges, such as in the field of renewable energy and climate change, agro-value chains, investment promotion, and the 4th industrial revolution. So for UNIDO, the theme of ICT is of course a key one, as it impacts trade capacities, quality infrastructure, and compliance to standards. We have examples of successful interventions supporting, for example, e-commerce in different member states, but we would like to devise specific and scalable interventions in SIDS too, including through regional projects. In fact, ICT has the potential to help SIDS in overcoming some of the challenges derived from their isolation and remoteness. It can thus support trade and economic diversification, as Martin rightly pointed out. This is even more true, of course, under the current circumstances with COVID-19 and the current restrictions on people's movements and the heavy blow to SIDS economies in their continued reliance on tourism. Therefore, I very much look forward to our discussion today. I'm sure that all speakers will provide very useful insights and perspectives on the potential positive impact of ICT in SIDS. So thank you very much again from my side for taking time out of your busy schedules to join this session today. And let me assure all of you that at UNIDO we will continue to be a reliable partner in addressing the cause of SIDS during and beyond the COVID-19 crisis, and of course, in the framework of the UN system-wide support. So thank you very much, and back to you, Martin.
Thank you very much for your opening words. Well taken. With that, I just would like to introduce briefly our panelists of today. So basically, first we go into the Caribbean. Jamaican national, Mr. Gary Jackson, doctor. He is the executive director of the Caribbean Center of Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. So CCRE is the official agency of the Caribbean community to promote the uptake of renewable energy and energy efficiency markets. And it's a particular pleasure also because UNIDO was involved in the establishment of the center and is cooperating with Mr. Jackson closely. Mr. Jackson holds a PhD in mechanical engineering and a Master of Science in project management, and both from the University of Birmingham, United Kingdom. Our second guest is Mrs. Vanessa Gray. She is representing the International Telecommunication Union, which is a specialized agency of the United Nations since many years, when still ICTs were not so high on the agenda, let's say, of the development agenda and the SDGs. And she is the head of division for least developed countries and small island states. And she is studying a lot the needs of these countries in terms of ICTs, and also is developing and managing tailored programs in that respect. So Mrs. Gray holds a master's degree in political science and economics from the Graduate Institute of International Development Studies in Geneva, Switzerland. Also joining today is Michelle Marius. She is representing the private sectors, let's say, in the Caribbean. And she is publisher and editor of ICT Pulse. So she founded this blog based on her personal experience of digitalization issues in the Caribbean. And she hopes to draw attention to how digital policies can be developed for the benefits of people in that region. And she has a decade of experience, let's say, in telecommunication, ICT policy, regulation, contracting, and consulting. And I suppose Mr. Gary Jackson and Michelle, after this conversation, will have a lot to discuss how they drive forward the green and blue energy transition in the Caribbean by using digital technologies. Going to the next speaker, Mr. Dr. Amjad Umar, who is the director and professor of the Information Systems Engineering and Management program of Harrisburg University of Science and Technology. He is also professor of systems and telecommunication at the University of Pennsylvania. So he has more than 30 years of experience that includes senior management and consulting advisory positions with governments and industries around the globe. And he is also, from the United Nations point of view, the architect of the ICT for SIDS partnerships, where he's particularly focusing on smart hubs and smart towns for small island developing states. So he worked in more than 40 countries. Thank you very much for joining us. We know it's a very late time for you, so thank you to be with us here.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Last but not least, I would also to introduce Mr. Shifesh Parsad. I would like to say a kind bula to Fiji, let's say. He would participate in this discussion today, but unfortunately, due to emergency, he could not finally take part of our conversation, but he sends his regards. I just also want to introduce him. He is a digital development specialist at the World Bank, and he has more than 50 years of experience in the public sector in Fiji, where he held positions like the Director for Communications, and he was also the chairman of the Telecommunication Authority of Fiji. Unfortunately, he could not be here today, but maybe we can also get his contribution by video at a later stage. So basically with that, I would like to open up the discussions. We have prepared some interesting questions for the panelists. I would like to start with Mrs. Vanessa Gray. I think we can conclude that over the past decade, ICTs had a tremendous success story, let's say. Including the broad range of digitalization as part of the fourth industrial development trend. But we have to say, we have to still work on the inclusiveness of that process, because still around 4 billion people in developing countries do not have access even to basic internet infrastructure. So I wanted to ask you, Vanessa, how we can ensure further inclusive digital growth. Up to you, Vanessa.
Thank you very much, Martin. So yes, that is true. I agree. When you say half the world's population is not using the internet, Our latest figures actually just came out last week, and maybe we can show the first slide that I prepared, where we can see data from the ITU for different regions, but also for the small island developing states. And we see here that globally, just over 50%, 51% of the world's population is using the internet, which is always, a very popular indicator to refer to digitalization. We see that in the small island developing states, the figure is slightly higher, 52%, but still relatively limited and relatively low. And of course, this is very important because, as you said, information and communication technologies can help mitigate many of the challenges that are affecting small island developing states, and they can provide the foundation for digitizing and also diversifying the economy. We know that SIDS have made great progress in terms of the universality and affordability of their ICT networks since the 2014 Samoa conference. Mobile broadband coverage has risen from 50% at the time in 2014 to close to 90% today. And also the price for mobile data services has virtually halved and has become much more affordable. If we can please show the second slide that I prepared on the prices. Here we see, so this graph shows mobile voice and mobile data basket prices as a percentage of income. So this is really about the affordability of the prices. And at the bottom of this graph, we see that for the small island developing states, people still have to pay 4.5 and 4.1% of their monthly income as a percentage of their GNI per capita a month. So this is lower than in many other regions, but it is still above what the Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development has identified as the target, which is 2%. These prices should represent no more than 2% of income level. So there's still some scope for improvement in the SIDS. And so we know that at the same time, by 2021, most SIDS are connected to fiber optic submarine cables, leaving just 3 unconnected from global undersea networks. And as infrastructure expands and affordability improves in the SIDS, other factors such as digital skills and awareness are becoming more significant constraints to internet uptake. We also know that disruptive and transformative technologies and services such as artificial intelligence, blockchains, drone, and mobile money are being used to enhance sustainable development in small island developing states. And their impacts have nevertheless been muted owing to largely limited application, and constraints include lack of technical, financial, and human resources. So there's really a need to upgrade skills for applying digital technologies to development challenges and to ensure better coordination between the ICT specialists and the different sectors of the economy. Digital technologies and applications, particularly social media, also pose risks, for example, in terms of false information and misuse of personal information. And here we need forward-thinking strategies, appropriate regulatory policies in areas such as data protection, and we also, very important, need regional cooperation to provide consistency and bargaining power when we're dealing with stakeholders in order to anticipate and mitigate these challenges. So just a few key recommendations that we have identified. First of all, the regulatory environment needs to be strengthened to promote dynamic and sustainable ICT sector. Over half the SIDS are what we call the second generation of regulation out of currently 5, and they're facing difficulties confronting disruption to their ICT markets. In some SIDS, greater competition needs to be stimulated, while in other markets, attractiveness needs to be strengthened through transparent and flexible regulation. In addition, sufficient spectrum needs to be made available for wireless broadband and operators' diversification into new business lines such as mobile money should be also further considered. We've seen that fiber optic connectivity via submarine cables is now or will soon be available in most of the SIDS. And this has dramatically increased international bandwidth and the potential for development of ICT enabled services, and certainly also driven down the prices that we just looked at. Yet most SIDS have been slower to seize the opportunity and to foster digital entrepreneurship and innovation, and creating the conditions required to increase the use of ICT domestically and facilitate trade is vital in order to enable the transformation to digital economies and also reduce the brain drain.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Vanessa. I think you tapped on very important points. I saw also the big gap in Africa when it comes to digital infrastructure. And also, I think you had a very important point on promoting entrepreneurship and innovation in SIDS, so that digitalization is becoming an inclusive process, so where the local economy and local entrepreneurs and innovators are benefiting, and it's not just an export of services and products. And I think, interestingly, also during the COVID crisis, there were interesting developments, like in Barbados, for example, that Barbados was starting to market Barbados, where entrepreneurs can work and can rely on a very sound digital infrastructure, because Barbados currently is facing a dramatic downturn of the tourism. So it was seen as a counter strategy. So you see how the digital infrastructure can be important. But now, how can we make it going? We have many SIDS also still in Africa, also to some extent. And what is, let's just say, internationally required? Which actions we need to take so that SIDS and the least developed countries can build up this digital infrastructure? What sort of transformational outcomes would we see as a result?
Mm-hmm. Yes, maybe let's start, because you mentioned broadband and the transformational outcomes. So obviously, broadband networks are essential for higher level services, such as you mentioned teleworking, but also telemedicine, online learning, also climate monitoring and advanced electronic government services. And broadband triggers higher economic impacts as it is always on, with high-speed data transmission and also lower latency, raising productivity and enabling new business models. And exactly what you just said, the strategic importance of ICTs and connectivity have also been highlighted during the COVID-19 pandemic for access to information, education, government services. And one area of particular importance, I think, for many SIDS is disaster management. And maybe just a little bit about this, because we know small islands are naturally prone to disasters caused by earthquakes and severe weather events, and are being affected by climate change, resulting in increased extreme weather events such as tropical cyclones, hurricanes, floods, and landslides, to name just a few. And so connectivity here can really help address these events by providing remote communities with access to early warning systems and real-time weather information. Remote sensing and geographic information systems, social media, but also drones are just some of the ICT tools that are already being used in SIDS for risk assessments of hazards and for monitoring the impact of climate change. In Vanuatu, for example, drones were used for rapid damage assessment in following Cyclone Pam as early as in March 2015. And in Palau, artificial intelligence is being used to analyze location data such as weather, energy costs, and physical characteristics to accelerate transition from expensive and polluting diesel fuels to renewable energy. And also, we can just show the third slide that I bought. We also have an ITU study that's confirming that both fixed and mobile broadband have a positive economic impact in the most vulnerable countries. And there's this study then also includes a number of concrete examples. So again, what So what action is really needed to allow for these changes? So first of all, we need forward-thinking strategies, appropriate regulatory policies, and again, given the small size of SIDS and the small markets, we need regional cooperation to provide consistency and bargaining power when dealing with other stakeholders. We also need transformational outcomes that can be triggered when we identify synergies between the ICT sector and others, health, education, and so on. And that is particularly important for development opportunities and also in the context of the achievement of the SDGs, when we need to look into how ICTs can accelerate development. We must also recognize the difference between the SIDS. This is very important. While SIDS share many characteristics, there are huge differences between them. And this is apparent in ICT infrastructure use and applications, where there are very wide gaps. And some of the data that ITU produces also show these differences and these gaps. Some SIDS are far ahead with advanced infrastructure and high levels of use, while others lag behind. So support needs to be tailored for these different groups. And where there is medium to high ICT uptake, the potential exists to incorporate more advanced digital technologies to tackle development challenges. And for SIDS with lower levels of ICT, efforts are required to create an environment that is conducive to expanding network infrastructure and developing regulatory expertise. In all the SIDS, there is significant scope for making greater use of digital technologies for sustainable development in order to achieve the SDGs. And finally, one important point that I always highlight is we need timely and relevant statistics, since these are essential for policymakers and to monitor and fine-tune our strategies, but also to see progress. The availability of up-to-date ICT indicators in the SIDS varies. We have a few countries that produce detailed sector-specific reports. Some carry out annual surveys on household and individual ICT usage, while others include topics like internet use and household availability of digital devices in their regular household surveys. The Eastern Caribbean Telecommunications Authority is notable for compiling supply-side telecommunication statistics for its 5 member states. Most SIDS, however, collect ICT indicators sporadically only, sometimes only as part of a census that is carried out every 10 years or so. And in a handful of SIDS, there are no official data for something as critical as internet usage. And it is imperative for SIDS to include ICT indicators in their national statistical systems, again, for us, to allow us to monitor progress and to have better policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. I think you tapped also on an important point, and that is regional cooperation and the opportunities to create economies of scale. And by staying with regional cooperation, I would like to draw the attention to Mr. Gary Jackson, who heads the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. He was also dealing with utility issues as part of the Caribbean Utility Organization, CARELEC, for some time. So I would like to ask him some important questions about the opportunities of digitalization in the energy sector in our countries, like in the industrialized countries. This revolution is changing everything. Let's just say new business models coming up, utility models are changed. And I would like to know how you see, Gary, this development in the Caribbean, and how digitalization can facilitate the energy transition and make critical infrastructure more resilient against climate change. Can you give us some concrete examples from your scope of experience, Gary?
Thank you, Martin, and it's a pleasure to be here. It was very interesting to hear Vanessa's intervention, in particular that slide where she showed the cost of internet use versus income. It would be interesting to see with electricity, what that would look like, and see a correlation between IT usage and electricity usage. because they are basically intertwined. You know, we can't do one without the other. You know, as these countries are pushing the envelope of sustainable energy in their systems, they are very ambitious targets. I mean, countries like Barbados are trying to get to 100%. Jamaica has touted 50%. And as these countries, as these small economies try to push the envelope, you know, with intermittencies in the systems and to consider reliability and availability of energy and meeting the demands of how we use electricity, ICT is going to play a very critical role. We have heard the terminologies of smart systems, smart appliances, smart grid. You know, those type of terminologies really looking at how we optimize, you know, from supply to demand, and how we are going to actually meet those demands with the intermittencies that we may have from solar energy, wind energy, and all those renewable energies that have intermittencies. Now, as countries push these sustainable goals, we have to recognize that Ireland doesn't have what we call a super grid, doesn't have a lot of interconnections that will give us reliability and availability. And that's really what people want. They want to know that power is always available and that it's reliable. So one of the things that we have to consider is how do we, you know, as countries move towards decentralization, decarbonization, what are some of the things that we need to do to ensure that reliability and availability and affordability are consistent with what the people require? You know, policies have been set, targets have been set. We are not yet sure how cybersecurity is going to play a role in this. We understand it is a risk. We have seen it in some of the utilities already. They have been attacked. They have lost information. It has created vulnerabilities in their system. They have made changes to support that. And that is another area that we might need to kind of focus on to see how we can support them better. Energy access, Vanessa mentioned about the vulnerabilities of some of these systems and some of these islands. Energy access is also a critical part, in particular how we can get energy to these remote villages and how they can still remain connected remotely to urban areas, in particular for trade. You know, they will need to all have a good understanding, and then for emergency response for the vulnerability of these communities, to landslides, to floods, and all these other things that are impacting them. And to see how we can actually use ICT to support these initiatives. Now, one of the things that we have been doing at the SICRI, we are developing what we call a energy modeling, renewable energy virtual lab. What that would do is help member states to deploy these resources in a more responsible and proactive way as they look to deploy these resources in these ambitious targets. We are trying to help them to navigate the landscape to, you know, as for example, as e-mobility becomes more adopted in the region and transportation is now merging with electricity. Again, we have to look at how demand response is going to be utilized to support these interventions. Time of use is going to be utilized to support these interventions. And a lot of this is embedded in an ICT infrastructure to ensure that supply can meet demand in a reliable and affordable way. So it's really about optimization now. It's really about bridging the gap between what is available and what is required at the same time, and ensuring that, you know, you don't have disruptions in manufacturing, you don't have disruptions in industries like the hotel industry. You don't have disruptions in hospitals, that you have an ICU unit, for example, and understand how we can maintain reliability in that regard. Other thing I want to just relate to you is how we are going to, countries I'm looking at democratization, you know, debundling. In small island development states, it's very tricky to do that, to have different generators on the system from different suppliers. And we have to be ensuring that we are not increasing the cost for our customers. We are actually looking at how we're going to be optimal in delivering those services going forward. Thanks.
You mentioned already some initiatives like integrated power markets and e-mobility. I would be interested to hear a bit more about some other programs. I think you are also working on integrated climate resilience plans where you try to put up a modeling platform which will help member states, for example. And I would also be interested, as you are operating within a global network of regional sustainable energy centers, which we also from UNIDO are facilitating, because the centers like the C3 exists also in the Pacific and in the Africa regions, and it covers basically all of the SIDS. So in the scope of this global network, we're trying also to launch something like a digitalization of the energy sector initiative. By the way, Vanessa, I think this could be a very nice initiative where we could cooperate potentially with ITU also together. So digitalization in the energy sector, moving it out through regional cooperation, regional centers. I think this would be a wonderful initiative jointly. And Gary, I would like to hear how you see that digitalization, let's just say within the scope of your programs, and how we can do SIDS cooperation through this global network or through other means with other SIDS, how we can learn from each other.
Sure, thanks, Martin. So yes, to your point about building better resilience and with this COVID condition, we thought thinking about building better for the future. Now, one of the things that we have undertaken, as I mentioned, as countries look to push the renewable energy envelope, we have to ensure that they are doing this in a responsible and an appropriate way. So one of the things that we are working with them on now is what we call an integrated resource and resilience plan. Now, this is a 25 to 30-year plan for the electricity sector as it expands to meet the demands, to understand the vulnerabilities in the system and to make them more resilient going forward. In this integrated resource and resilience plan, we are considering a number of things. We are considering the supply options the countries have. We are considering the demand side measures that they will need to put in place. And then we are considering all the resilience, all the vulnerabilities that they may have, from the Sahara dust to the hurricanes, to the earthquakes, to the droughts, to the floods, to the landslides. And looking at these vulnerabilities and understanding what would be our least regret path going forward. Understanding when we embed adaptation, there could be a cost increase, but understanding what the long-term impact will be may not be so costly if you were to lose that system in a shorter period of time. So what we're doing is a couple things. Understanding the capacity needs of people. So as we get into more digitalization, we have to build human capacity. We have a saying here, smart systems need smart people. So we need to actually make these persons that are operating these systems smarter or build their capacity going forward. Then we have to have the right policy framework. And I've heard Vanessa mention about regulation. This is very critical because we have to ensure that we have sustainability in the system. So we have to have the right policy that will now lead to the right legislation and regulatory framework to support these systems going forward. And as we develop the plans and understanding all the nuances in these plans as the countries build resilience, we have to ensure that when we finish the plan that we actually projectize the plan. So we have to actually implement now. And in implementing these projects, we have to still look back in time to understand what are the policy frameworks and if these plans can actually inform new policies so that the systems are not constrained in its development going forward. And then we need to have the right partnerships. So when you think about all the players in these markets right now, the utilities, the regulators, the governments, private sector, and then our development partners worldwide, you have to establish the right partnerships to support these developments. And within the ICT infrastructure, what we want to do, we want to share the experiences with other SIDS. We look at this as a global village, and as Martin mentioned, the global sustainable centers for renewable energy and energy efficiency. We have to find cooperation between them to understand their system, they understand our system, so that we can actually bridge the gap where there are gaps and support the development of the energy landscape not only for the technology that we are trying to achieve and how fast we want to get down the road, but also to build the capacity of our persons. As the UN Secretary General said, it's a race we must win, but I would add to that, it's a race we'll need to endure, because this is going to be with us for a very long time. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Gary. With that, I would like to stay in the Caribbean, and I would turn to the private sector view and the communication view of the digital transformation, which is represented today by Mrs. Michelle Marius. Thank you very much for joining us. I would like to ask you, you have been involved in a variety of digitalization endeavors worldwide, and now you run this specialized blog, the ICT Pulse, focused on the Caribbean region. How aware are digital entrepreneurs and technologists of the opportunities or support available? How can policymakers improve digital outcomes in the region? What is your personal view on that?
Oh boy, a good question. I think just to start off, I think one of the challenges that still occurs in the region is the extent to which, or probably rather the rate at which information gets to people who need it. And admittedly, I think, a lot of organizations these days, they're publishing their notices online, and they might be putting a lot of information through, for example, the digital space. We have all gotten digital, so social media and the like. But I think that there's still a lot of gaps, because there's so much content, vying for our attention these days. And, for example, I think for all of us, we may realize that, only a few items actually get our attention. They get into our news feeds and the like. So unless I think you as the user or the entrepreneur or the technologist, specifically look out for opportunities or make a point to search, various online platforms and the like, you are most likely going to miss, those opportunities, the supports that are available. And, perhaps it's only if a friend or a colleague tells you about it that you might end up being in the know. So I think somehow it is a paradox, because as much as, many of us are now online, there is just so much information coming at us that it can be difficult to actually get the information that you need. Back to you, Martin.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I also would like to ask you which lessons learned we can draw from successful digital policies and how they can be replicated or adapted in the Caribbean region. What would you say?
All right, well, I think digital outcomes is just such a fascinating area. And I think it's a multifaceted challenge, as I think countries tend to be grappling with a broad range of issues and imperatives. And in many instances, what you find, especially in small island developing states, is that you have a lot of challenges, but limited resources. And therefore, you tend to find that attention and resources are being deployed to address what might be considered urgent issues. But I think just based on my observation and the realities and the outcomes that eventuate, is that the focus tends only to be on the spear, so to speak, the tip of the iceberg, and the undergirdings of issues tend to be overlooked. So you almost have a situation where we're just dealing with the most urgent matters, but which would be the tip of the iceberg, but the major challenges, the bigger issues that you really may not necessarily see, are not being given any attention or given limited attention. And as a result, what we then have is a hodgepodge of programs and initiatives that do not necessarily push us forward in any substantial or meaningful way. And I think just in terms of like an example for me would be school connectivity. And I think in respect of COVID-19 and the fact that we had all of these closures, some of which still continue, that governments, certainly within the Caribbean region, have been grappling with how to get students connected, especially if they're not at school. And so we have had a number of initiatives to buy tablets and to get tablets to put into the hands of students. And that is wonderful. I'm certainly not in any way criticizing that. But after you get the tablets to students, I mean, many of them may live in households where there may not be any internet connectivity. Their parents cannot afford it. Even some of the schools may not have internet access. So, okay, so you have tablets, but we don't have all of the systems in place to facilitate their use. And I think that is just indicative of the observations that I've been seeing. And I think going on to the whole improving the digital outcomes and even lessons that we can learn from other countries or other regions, and not necessarily even talking about specific, policies or initiative. I sometimes just think that it's really about the approach. Do we look at challenges holistically? Yes, there are the imperatives, there are the urgent matters, but is there a wider construct in which these issues need to operate? What are the bigger objectives at play, and how might we move towards achieving the bigger objectives in a more coherent and cogent manner? And I think sometimes we end up just wanting to, we tend to be in this sort of firefighting mode a lot of the time. And it is necessary because for many developing countries, you don't necessarily have the resources. And because you don't have the resources, you really cannot plan as you might wish. So for example, yes, you may have gotten a project approved, or you have some program that you want to implement, but you may have some of the funding for it today, but 6 months from now, 2 years from now, there's no guarantee that the funds are available. And I think that is probably what is also driving the way how we address issues. But, going and looking at what has obtained in other regions, and, here in the Caribbean, a lot of the digital experts look to countries like Estonia and Singapore. And I think the biggest lesson that we can draw from them is really in terms of when we have a plan that we seek to try to implement it. And I mean, Gary was talking about the 30-year resilience plan that is being conceptualized and will be implemented for energy. And what I think often happens is really about us trying to be very intentional about executing the plan, and hopefully, I guess, finding the money that needs to be secured to put it in place. Because I think what we have happened is that we tend to cherry pick a lot, and often we tend to go for a lot of quick wins. And so you find that, again, you have little successes that can be touted, especially in the political sphere, but we may not have the, whether it's political will or the policy intention of really doing some of the difficult work, the foundational work that may not necessarily give us the political, accolades that we might need, but will put us in a considerably better position to leverage some of the developments and some of those foundations in the longer term. So I do think that it's really about us being very intentional with our planning and the execution more importantly.
Mm-hmm. So thank you very much, Michelle. With that, I would like to turn to Mr. Amjad Umar. And Mr. Amjad Umar, as you know, in the GMIS area, we are focusing a lot on how the digital transformation can transform, let's just say, the manufacturing and servicing sector, in particular the manufacturing sector. So as we know, as in SIDS, the classic manufacturing sector is a bit limited, let's just say, and the broad range of activities is more in the servicing sector, like tourism and so on. When we now look at the growth potential in SIDS, one of the big growth potentials is considered the blue economy growth sector, because we all know the SIDS, they have their big ocean territories and exclusive economic zones. And there's the opportunity to generate new income streams and to diversify the economies with these ocean resources, let's to say, which are currently not harnessed or not harnessed by the SIDS themselves. So there's usually strong growth is expected in the areas, for example, of marine, aquaculture, fish processing, ports, coastal tourism, shipbuilding and repairs, but also the new areas like desalination, marine biotechnologies, ocean energy, and seabed mining, for example. So in these areas, particularly the emerging areas, these new emerging areas, they have a lot to do with digitalization. So basically the basis is very often digitalization. Also to make these sectors more effective, digitalization can contribute a lot. And there I wanted to ask you a bit, with your vast experience, you're working in so many countries and also including the SIDS, I wanted to ask you how this digital solution can help SIDS or other LDCs to transit towards blue economies and the sectors I was mentioning.
Thank you very much, Martin, for a very good question. Although I have worked with the ICTs and developing these for many years, I have not devoted that much time on blue economies. However, I know enough about it to be able to answer your question. To answer the question, I need to refer to a table that you can see. This table shows on the top the different type of activities that support the blue economies. For example, it shows marine aquaculture. Marine aquaculture is the equivalent of agriculture, but that focuses more on the fisheries. Very much like agriculture focuses on growing chickens and other animals, marine aquaculture focuses on raising fisheries, shrimps, and all the other type of fisheries. Then the next activity that is part of the blue economies is the fish processing, which goes through the entire life cycle of a fish, from the point when it's caught to the point when it actually is processed and packaged into small packets that are then distributed to food stores and other and restaurants and things of that nature. Another very important activity in the blue economies is seaports and tourism, and that's very well understood by everyone, so I am not going to try to explain that. So these are the places where the fisheries and all the other items arrive, and then there are a lot of tourism that is centered around those areas, and also in the islands themselves. Then another activity that's part of the blue economies and the one that supports the blue economies is the shipbuilding and repair, because of the fact that ships and boats naturally support the blue economy. So building the ships and repairing them, of course, is a very important activity. Then comes the activity, is a very interesting activity of desalination. These are more modern and newer activities, as Martin, you have mentioned. So desalination has to do with removing salt and minerals from the seawater so that it can be used for domestic purposes and things of that nature. So desalination is a very, very important area of future work. And of course, marine biotechnologies, where this is biotechnology, but it is focusing on underwater biotechnology. And the Then there are two very interesting areas of work of ocean energy, because of the fact that we are all familiar with the hydraulic energy that the energy is produced by rivers, and the water from the rivers and canals and things of that nature in many countries. But the ocean energy is focusing on taking the energy of the out of the sea waves and using it for generating electric power. A very, very interesting idea and a fascinating area of work. Another very fascinating area of work is the seabed mining that has to do with mining the area that the bottom of the sea for precious items and minerals and things of that nature. People have been doing mining in sandbox in area in the desert where there's a lot of sand, but this is focusing naturally on the seabeds and mining of the seabeds. And the very last column is on disaster resilience and management. Actually, it's DRRM, disaster resilience and recovery management. And that is a very important area for all the SIDS. Now, there are very many, very large number of technologies that support these activities, and they're essential for economic development in small islands and developing states. But I'm going to only focus on, let's say, 7 or 8 of them for the interest of time. And also, these are the ones that have a very dominant impact on the blue economy. So I'm going to start with first on the 3D printing and other core technology like databases and networks and wireless networks and things of that nature. So these type of technologies have great deal of impact on actually on all the blue economy activities listed on the first row. But there are very interesting developments, especially in seaport and tourism. For example, 3D printing is used in making jewelry, very expensive looking jewelry, and fashion design for clothes, and also using plastic waste to recycle it to build new products, manufacture new products like eyeglasses and purses and slippers and things of that nature. So those are the applications of 3D printing in the tourism kind of an area. Of course, 3D printing is used for building. You can build models of ships and other type of items. And there is a very interesting potential area of work that has to do with the combining the desalination and ocean energy together, because the desalination plants need a lot of power to operate. So the question is, can you use the sea energy to power the desalination plants? I don't know the answer to that yet, but I was very intrigued by that notion when I was kind of reviewing some of the material in this highly interesting area of using digital technologies for blue economics. And of course, 3D printing can be used for in the disaster resilience and management for building models and things of that nature. So 3D printing and other kind of core technologies, databases, networks, and the other usual suspects are very highly useful in supporting almost all the activities that are listed on the top. So I'm just going to walk through different families of these dominant technologies and highlight their major impact and implications for the blue economies and the activities that are part of the blue economies. The next item listed here is artificial intelligence with machine learning and deep learning capabilities. I mean, this is a large area of work. In fact, one can devote an entire session just on this particular topic. But I'm just going to once again give you just a highlight of the key impacts on possible impacts on blue economies. For example, artificial intelligence can be used to detect early diseases in the aquaculture, where instead, so that something can be done at that time instead of throwing all the fisheries out later on. There is a very interesting area of work called precision fisheries that is based on the work in precision agriculture that is now getting some attention in the literature also. So this is where you can use artificial intelligence for supporting the fisheries through the life cycle. I'll talk about that a bit later on. Of course, AI for tourism is a very mature area of work using artificial intelligence by looking at the customer relationship management and looking at who are the tourists that visit these small islands, what time of the year, how long do they stay, and so on and so forth. So there's a great deal of intelligence that one can gather about the tourism industries. And of course, then that can become a source of continued revenues for the SIDS. In the area of shipbuilding and repair, there is just tremendous opportunities for artificial intelligence and machine learning in robotics and Industry 4.0. Industry 4.0 is essentially the fourth wave or the fourth revolution of industry. Industrialization started out with the Industry 1.0, 2.0, so on and so forth. And that started in the early 1900s and has evolved into now Industry 4.0, which is very heavily based on smart and intelligent machines and robotics and drones and all the other type of devices that have intelligence embedded in them. And then, of course, robotics are used for biotechnology, especially marine biotechnology. MIT has a lab called MIT C Lab. This is spelled like a C, like an ABC, the character C. And they're doing very interesting work on using robotics in marine biotechnology. And of course, the seabed mining can be supported by artificial intelligence and computer vision, because when you're in at the bottom of the sea, you can be assisted by machine learning algorithms that can detect what kind of objects you're looking at so that you can make decisions on it. And of course, machine learning has tremendous number of applications in the areas of disaster resilience and disaster management. So moving to the next kind of family of technologies that is roughly being called big data. This is data that is not just regular data that we accumulate, but this is a tremendous amount of data that is accumulated from diverse sources like social media and things of that nature. But a key player in big data is satellites images. So satellites are always producing large amount of data that is accumulated, and then that can be analyzed. By the way, big data and especially when it is combined from satellite images has huge applications of artificial intelligence, because machine learning algorithms are getting very good at recognizing objects. They can recognize all type of objects that human beings can see, because this data, there is a humongous amount of data that is captured from the satellite. Of course, you cannot have many people just sitting there and analyzing it. Machine learning algorithms can very quickly analyze this data and detect what kind of objects are there. So the particular application of big data and AI, and these two combined items are in many areas that support blue economies. For example, doing kind of different type of comparisons of farms, and also detecting the fish. This is I'm fascinated by this area of work, because what happens is that different type of fish like tuna and salmon, they eat different type of salt, and that salt is at the bottom of the sea. So satellite images can very easily see those accumulation of salt, and by absence and presence of the salt, they can detect what areas have more tuna. For example, if there is not very much salt left that tuna fish eats, that means that there is a lot of tuna there. So that can be used by fishermen when they are, of course, trying to make a living off of it. There's a great deal of potential for economic development by using satellite images of the seabeds and analyzing the salt and the availability of salt to detect what type of fisheries is available where. And then I did not have the time to really list all the things, but the artificial intelligence plus big data applications are everywhere. They are in seaports and tourism, they are in shipbuilding and repair, they are in desalination, they are in ocean and energy, and also they are used very heavily in disaster resilience and management. I am especially very fascinated by some applications of satellite images, where these images can detect where the populations have moved, especially after a disaster. So in many of the small islands where people live in small huts, and if there's a heavy rain or a storm of some nature, in many cases, and they lose their dwellings, so they move out of that area where they were because they don't have any house and homes. So the relief agencies and governments, if they want to send food to that area and they needed items to those areas, they cannot do that because they don't know where the populations have moved to. So looking at satellite images that can detect where is a sign of smoke, for example, that means somebody's cooking, so they can detect where people have moved to in different parts of the jungles and the hills and the mountains and the valleys in the island. So there are some very interesting applications of using, as I mentioned earlier, satellite data captured from the satellite images, and then applying artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms to recognize objects and events like smoke and things of that nature. There is, of course, an area, I'm moving down the line to blockchain technologies. Now, blockchain technologies have many potential applications in blue economies, but I did not list all of them because blockchains usually require fairly heavy duty machinery to detect detect any issues or challenges in the processing of blockchain. So I just listed a few things. There are in the fisheries, supply chain management of fisheries. There are very interesting applications on blockchain when the fish items are really transported from one location to another. So they need to be kept at certain temperatures. and the sensors in the refrigerators, let's say, they can take snapshots of the temperature, let's say every hour or every 15, 20 minutes or so, to make sure that throughout the journey, the food was kept at a certain desired temperature, and that data goes into blockchain that cannot be changed. So that's a very interesting application of blockchain and supply chain management, especially of the fisheries, because they need to be kept at a certain temperature. So also ledgers, digital ledgers can be kept in case of a disaster where there are many activities going on at the same time and nobody knows who did what. So the digital ledgers can keep track of that. So I'm moving down to the last row in this table here that is visible at present is the data analytics row. And in data analytics, of course, is the very rapid area of growth right now with the three major type of techniques, and they are the descriptive analytics, which basically just describes, or for purpose of visualization, what exactly is the situation by looking at the data. The predictive analytics, based on the existing data, they can predict. For example, they can predict looking at the housing market in the last 10 years and how it has gone up and down, to predict how it will be in the next 5 years and things of that nature. So the descriptive and predictive analytics is very well established, and then prescriptive analytics is the one where you find not only can tell what is possibly the trend, but it can help you find what is the best solution, the optimized solution for your particular situation. So all those three kind of analytics, the descriptive, the predictive, and the prescriptive analytics, can be used in different areas of and different activities to support blue economies. There is an interesting area of work called cognitive analytics. This is relatively new, where they go beyond the three other kind of technology and technical approaches, and they focus on also and employ artificial intelligence. So one comment I want to make is that the four technologies listed here, artificial intelligence, big data with satellites, blockchains, and data analytics, combined together, they present tremendous opportunities for improving the blue economies in SIDS in the future. And I think collectively that whole set of bag of technologies, the four technologies, need to be considered. And I'm myself now very interested in pursuing more research and development in those particular areas. Now, moving on to the last two rows of the IoTs and cyber physical systems. Cyber physical systems are the physical systems that we all use, but they are connected to the internet. So these could be your refrigerator, your clocks, and all the other devices that we have. Of course, the IoTs are Internet of Things, and IoEs are Internet of Everything. But anyway, Internet-enabled devices, Internet-enabled physical objects like bridges and buildings, so they can be so that you can detect some structural flaws in them and send that information and alarms to other places. So these sensors can be used, of course, in aquaculture, but in addition to that, the industrial IoTs are used heavily. These are heavy duty for the heavy industry, like shipbuilding. That's where they are used. So there are many applications of IoTs, and especially cyber physical systems in disaster resilience and management, because they can detect, for example, a bridge can have sensors and can have the intelligence to recognize how much load is right now on the bridge, and it can raise a alarm and close a bridge before more trucks and more things get on those things. So there are, in disaster resilience, of course, in the SIDS area, there are several interesting applications of that. The last part, the mobile apps, is probably one of the most interesting area of work, because what is happening is that there's, as you can see, these are all different type of technologies that appear to be standalone. In some cases, they're combined together. But the current breed of mobile apps that are coming out, called smart apps, they really combine all of the above. They combine artificial intelligence, they have sensors, and they can do analytics, they can capture data, and they may not have the ability to be able to run the analytics algorithm, but they can invoke the analytics algorithm from other places. So the mobile apps are becoming one of the most important member of this family of technologies that can have impact on blue economies. So I just want to keep this picture, this table for a little while, and now talk about the next step. So what I've done is basically given you an overview of the different types of activities in the blue economy and how these different technologies can impact and support them. Could I just go to the top row, please, for 1 minute? Yeah, thank you. So what I really want to talk about now for a few minutes is the last part of it. That, okay, so we know this, a table of this nature that shows you different possible applications, but how can this be used to actually develop a strategy that can help different islands? So this is an area that I'm right now working on SIDS, how to do strategic analysis for opportunities. So I'm going to be focusing more on blue economies now, also thanks to this very good question that was asked by Martin. So, so for example, the basic essence of the strategic analysis methodology would be at one, the first step would be focusing on the first row, which lists all the different activities in the needed to support blue economies, and to find out for each island. So let's say I'm working with Solomon Island. So for Solomon Island, the question is which one of those 7 or 8 key activities in the blue economies are the one that are least investment but highest impact. The important thing is not to go after everything, but to identify which things require very little investment, but on the other hand, they can provide high impact. I don't have the time right now to go through some examples, but that's something that I intend to do, and I'm actually in the process of writing a short paper where I can explain with some examples. But so there are many things. For example, for Solomon Island, there might be something. One of those activities may be the one like it may be just tourism and marine aquaculture, especially the sea energy, ocean energy could be very important, because that particular island, Solomon Island, has, I think, close to 900 islands, and they're all surrounded by water. So they have this tremendous amount of ocean energy around them. So it could be any one of those top activities that could be selected by different different islands. Once they have selected that, then the next question is, how can the technologies either decrease the investment and or increase the impact? For example, mobile apps can have profound impact, because once there is a mobile app developed that includes any of these technologies, that can be available from anywhere and everywhere. So this becomes a very interesting strategic analysis type of gamification, where you can have island SIDs identify which one of these activities are of low enough investment that they can initiate them, but they provide high enough impact, and then choose the technologies. I do not myself believe that technology should come first. I believe that the idea of what really are the things that are most beneficial, and then use the technology to improve the impact and also to decrease the investment. So that's like just a strategic analysis. And finally, there is also a need for an implementation plan that can help do detailed implementations and show exactly what needs to be done where, and who will be the player who will do that. So the strategic planning or strategic analysis followed by a planning type of machinery would be extremely beneficial. So at the end, I just want to mention that I am currently already, because of this opportunity to participate in this particular webinar, I'm already working on a paper, a short paper, 5 to 6 pages paper that explains this particular table and the opportunity for strategic analysis and detailed implementation planning, and develop also a tool in that area. Once again, I want to thank you for this opportunity and greatly appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Amjad. It was really great to listen because you said you don't know so much about the blue economy, but you were able, I think, to tap on all the sectors and the potential of the different digital applications to contribute to the productivity of the sectors. In that context, I would have a bit of questions on the inclusiveness. We as UNIDO, we're dealing a lot with the industrialization side. So on the one hand, it's that perspective that helping developing countries and also small island developing states in applying those solutions which are now coming on the market. And the other perspective is, can or is there potential that developing countries can also participate in the value chain of developing these new digital solutions, producing, assembling them, manufacturing parts of them, because this is usually a high value income area now.
Right.
Like leapfrogging to manufacturing high value products. Let's just that totally unrealistic, because this will remain the domain of industrialized and emerging countries. Or is there any perspective that small island states, because it has also something to do with knowledge, with brains, partners, with internet use, with programming capacities, and we have, particularly here in the Caribbean, we have very smart brains, a lot of them, and highly educated brains, let's to say, who can
very smart.
So basically the question is how those countries can also go into the manufacturing, assembling, designing of these high value products of digitalization. It has also something to do with adapting them to the local circumstances, because every country, every region has the uniqueness of adapted solutions. How would you consider that? Is there any chance?
I mean, I can take an attempt at answering your question. I mean, your questions are excellent, by the way. I mean, they're very thoughtful. I mean, they made me think, which happens occasionally to me. So I appreciate your questions. Now, my focus, as you know, I am a university professor and I've devoted my life to teaching. So I am a great believer that education can address many of the issues. For example, there is no reason why the young kids in SIDS or in LDCs cannot be trained and educated to work on fairly sophisticated products and things of that nature. It just depends upon the opportunities. And also giving them some ideas. Now, there are two types of manufacturing. I mean, of course, manufacturing is a very broad area of work, but there are lightweight manufacturing, and then there are, of course, heavy steel manufacturing. I spent early part of my life working in manufacturing industries in Detroit, so I know the basic layout of the manufacturing operations. But education and actually having programs that are geared to students who, let's say, have a high school education, and let's say they want to work more with their hands and building things. I think those are prime candidates to be trained for manufacturing type of jobs, and they can actually also be encouraged to become entrepreneurs. So especially with the digital, of course, with the equipments becoming available, like very lightweight robots and other kind of digital devices becoming available, it's much easier to attract and retain the young people in this particular area. I should mention this, that my focus so far has been very heavily on digital transformation and educating the young kids on how can they use the digital technologies to let's say form a small company, but accelerated very quickly into becoming a larger company with larger number of customers just by using digital technologies, because they can advertise and they can go from stage 0, like a brick and mortar, to a more higher level of services. I have not really thought through very carefully, I have to tell you that, about the manufacturing part. I have noticed that many of the SIDS, they lack manufacturing activities. Mike, do you know why is that the case?
Of the manufacturing capacities? I mean,
yeah. Is it a cultural thing, or is it?
Maybe I should give it to Gary, but I think one of the key factors is for sure that the scarcity of land. It's the distant from markets, and for sure Gary will confirm the biggest one of the biggest factor is also the costs which companies have to produce there, because you have usually in islands you have higher transport costs for everything, and you have
that's a big problem, because your products then have to be shipped. So in other words, if you are building some products in Samoa, how do they get to the United States?
And then
or
you
England?
have a fossil fuel dependency, which is
fuel dependencies
islands,
are many of those things, right?
Diesel generation, and so these are one of the factors. But maybe Gary, I would like to ask you a bit also what you think about it, whether, because you also have a background working with the University of West Indies, and Mr. Amjad also said that the basis for such for such entrepreneurial activities in the digital sector is education, actually. And I wanted to ask you, how do you see that coming in the Caribbean region, that by considering also the capacities of universities are limited locally, mainly to regional universities. And this connects of entrepreneurship, research and development, lack of finance for that. So how we can bring young people to get active in that sector, producing goods and services of digitalization?
A simple answer to that, Martin, is partnerships. I think there is a lack of partnerships between the academic institutions and industry. And I think they need to forge a stronger partnership so that students can have a more applied approach to problem solving and be a part of the solution. I think they have theorized a lot of things at the university level, and when they get into the industry, there's another learning curve again for them to go through. And I think if there could be stronger partnerships between industry and academia, I think that would be a good start point to solve some of the problems that we are undertaking. So I think we need stronger partnerships.
I think, Garrett, maybe it has also something to do that in emerging and industrial countries, usually have technology clusters where the government is incentivizing the cooperation among companies, and also the cooperation between then those companies maybe bundled in a physical space or not, but working together with research and development. And usually when we look at the international cluster organizations, also they are empty. There are nearly no members from developing countries, let's just say lower income developing countries, and also a few from the small island states. And there we were also working with the government of Barbados to establish one of those clusters, which is a pilot, and we are still want to see the results 2 years down the line.
Right.
Could be
May I ask a question also, please?
Yeah, please.
What about lightweight manufacturing? What I mean is still by using 3D printers and things of that nature, because in many islands, 3D printers are being used fairly heavily by young people, and they are using it for plastic recycling, and especially, I mean, you could call even making jewelry to be manufacturing. It is a manufacturing of sort. They are building something. Maybe there needs to be more focus on having manufacturing facilities in the small islands where the consumption is in small islands itself, so that the transportation costs to larger countries and other continents is not needed. In other words, there's basically having manufacturing facilities for just local consumption. I mean, that's just a thought that's occurring to me right now.
That's an excellent idea, but I think one thing that has to be considered, especially with small island developing states, can be whether or not a country has sufficient economies of scale to make it viable. And it's also, we can also talk about the actual 3D printing, but how do the raw materials get in? So is it that we will be, producing, I guess, whether it's the pellets, the inputs that will then be used to create the final outcome? If you start to have to import these things, again, costs go up because of just the nature and the imperatives around SIDS. So just something to consider. So sometimes it's really about the continuum of the whole process and the whole system, and not necessarily just the 3D printing, for example.
No, I understand. But what my question is, by the way, I'm enjoying this discussion an awful lot. Thank you very much for this opportunity. But my question is that has somebody really seriously asked and done a feasibility study that what are the kind of things that can be consumed within these small islands, and why can't they be manufactured in small islands? Has that kind of a question been asked seriously?
I mean, some of the islands, I think, have done these assessments, but Gary maybe?
Well, not in a full
I'm not aware
detail.
of it, but maybe you.
Yeah,
please.
not in a full detail. There have been pockets of it taking place, but I think a regional approach might be best suited. And as Michelle mentioned about economies of scale, I think the markets can accommodate a regional approach. But I think a lot of times, as countries, as cities go through these transitions, they normally take on a lot of the roles by themselves, and it's not wise for them to do that, given the global context. I mean, when you think about the red ocean, you talk about the blue ocean economy, you talk about the red ocean economy, you know, where there's a lot of competition, a lot of big sharks. I mean, when you look at countries like Barbados with 250,000, you know, Jamaica being one of the bigger islands at 2.8, maybe 3 million people. Look at Haiti, which at 11 million, who has a 35% electrification. So you think about a lot of these, when you think about, you know, size of population and the infrastructure weakness and all of these things that are happening simultaneously, I think from a regional approach, if we can get that regional organ operating in a way that can build these economies of scale, build these studies that will kind of converge to a single market economy, then I know we'll be in the right place. But that is work that is being undertaken right now, but we have not gotten far enough
maybe
than we should.
Also to complement Gareth with Amjad, one of the challenges of many islands is that their economies are not very much diversified. So many islands are depending very much on the tourism sector.
Exactly.
And this has led, for example, also in Barbados, for example, which had a manufacturing sector and also quite developed agriculture sector, but then due to the uptake of the tourism sector, it's just more attractive to work in the tourism sector. And for example, the agriculture sector has gone down actually over the past years, for example, which also then led to a dependence on food imports, and you have that all over the place. I mean, you have the Caribbean situation, but you also have the African cities, which face basically a similar situation. And this dependence, so basically now also these different crises have demonstrated, also the financial crisis already, also now the COVID crisis demonstrates again, we have to diversify our economies, because the tourism sector is excellent, but on the other hand, it depends how the tourism sector evolves also. And there's one thing is that most of the islands don't have really an industrialization strategy. So the very islands who have an industrialization strategy per se, looking at the manufacturing sector and the servicing sector as a whole, and saying what we can do locally, what we import, and do it and move it forward like a strategy. So there is some challenges countries have. For example, now Barbados is trying to do that again. They are developing in this moment a new industrialization strategy. But for sure, this is an important activity to do that. But due to dependence on the tourism sector, it was just the focus was more on that one. And maybe I would like to touch on an aspect also, and that is gender mainstreaming, because we have Michelle also here. So I would like to hear a bit from you what you think is digitalization and gender. What are the important gender aspects of the digitalization in the view of using these technologies, but also in the view that women can become entrepreneurs for digital solutions?
Okay, interesting question. I think that I guess the women have been entrepreneurs for so long, especially I think within, let's say, the Caribbean context, where you may have a number of single parent households being run by women. And of course, they having to support their families, and that may not necessarily be through, employment through an established, organization. So many of them might be self-employed or doing various, multiple jobs, to ensure that they can, manage their families and take care of all of their responsibilities. And we have here in the region, I think women may be as exposed to the technology as men, but we may find that they might be a little bit more intimidated by it. And of course, we still are battling what one might consider the traditional roles and functions of women versus men in the workplace, and the extent to which women might be pursuing STEM subjects, engineering, computer science, and the like. And therefore, at the end of the day, whether or not, or the extent to which we then have these graduates and that cohort moving in a very sure-footed way into digital entrepreneurship initiatives, and I think that is something that we are still grappling with, because oftentimes and across the region you may find that female enrollment, whether or not, primarily, let's say at the tertiary level institution, maybe up until the end of high school, it might be more or less equal because it's compulsory education and the like. But at university, you may find that women enrollment outstrips that of men. And certainly in maybe some of the more traditional professions, whether it's medicine, law, surprisingly not engineering, but I guess we can also appreciate why. So I somehow think we have had a fair number of programs, for example, Girl in ICT and similar things, where they are trying to show girls that there is a future in engineering, there is a future in computer science and digital related subjects, which I think ultimately will help to spur the move towards more digital entrepreneurship among women. But it is a challenge, and I guess we still wait to see how it is all going to turn out. But I know that is definitely something that is being given a lot of attention, because we do have so many girls and women in the workforce, many of them sometimes even in management positions in reputable organizations, but somehow we still have not been able to crack that barrier between women in tech and digital entrepreneurship by women.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, do you have a final question or comment from your side before we close? It seems to be fine. Then I think it was really a very interesting discussion about the opportunities and the barriers also for using digital solutions in small island developing states. Sorry, Gary, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, just to Michelle's point, and this goes back to, you mentioned about the COVID crisis. Now, one of the interesting things is we call it the tsunami effect. So as COVID is going through the globe now and causing this earthquake, there's this latency effect that is going to take place. We call it the tsunami effect. These kids, through these remote access, we're not sure if the education is in a rich environment. And I think teachers are challenged by how they are deploying these resources through digitalization to support these children. And the children are also intimidated by how they are actually receiving this information remotely. And Michelle had mentioned about having a tablet and not having access to internet. But I think there's going to be a tsunami effect where another 10 years down the road, we may see the effect of what COVID has done on our education system. And I think we have to be very conscious of that and start putting things in place to mitigate it, because it's going to have a rolling effect going forward. To the point where we talk about, Michelle mentioned about intimidation, people are being intimidated by how they are learning right now. Kids in general are not focused as they would have in a classroom setting. And I think that is something that we have to be very mindful of and see how we are going to assist, even with gender balance. I mean, if you talk about introducing STEM to these kids and you're not able to do it in a practical one-on-one way with them, and you have lost a year. And trust me, losing 1 year of education in these development stages is a lot. And we have to find a way to mitigate it, because it's what's going to happen 10 years from now. And I thought I will just leave you with that. Thanks.
Thank you, Gary. I think it was a very important point, and that once again touches the point that COVID-19 recovery must have a longer perspective. It has to be green, it has to be blue in the case of small island developing states, and it has to be digital. And that, I think, is an important insight also we have seen today. I think it was a very interesting discussion, a lot of insights. I would like to thank the panelists, but I also would like to encourage you, because I like these formats and you see many opinions, expertise. It's always good to follow up on that, because together we can do maybe an interesting program or project together. I think that would be interesting. Basically, I would say that so what we heard today is when I look at this glass in my front, the glass is, I would say, half empty. There's still a lot to do in terms of moving the digitalization agenda forward in small island developing states. I thank you very much for participating in this interesting discussion, and I think we see us in an exciting joint initiative maybe down the line.